I never thought I would watch a 52-year-old woman in a salmon-colored cardigan deliberately crash into my boat while I stood on the dock with my morning coffee. But that is exactly what happened on a Tuesday morning in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. My name is Gregory Vance, and I had spent the last 3 years saving up for my dream boat, a 24-foot Sea Ray Sundancer that I kept moored at the community marina in Lakeshore Estates, the planned community where I had purchased my lakefront property 2 years ago. The boat represented more than just a hobby to me. It was my escape from the stress of running my own architectural firm, my weekend sanctuary, and honestly, one of the few possessions I truly loved. I had named her the Blue Haven, and she was pristine white with navy blue accents, equipped with everything I needed for comfortable day trips on the lake. That particular morning started like any other. I woke up at 6, made myself a strong pot of coffee, and walked down to the marina to check on the Blue Haven before heading to the office. The sun was just beginning to rise over the water, casting that golden glow that made me grateful I had chosen to live here despite the increasingly ridiculous homeowners association rules that seemed to multiply every month. The Lakeshore Estates HOA was run with an iron fist by a woman named Patricia Cunningham, a middle-aged real estate agent with blonde highlights that looked like they had been applied with a paintbrush, and an attitude that suggested the entire community existed solely to fulfill her vision of suburban perfection. She had been HOA president for 7 years, and in that time, she had implemented rules about everything from the exact shade of white you could paint your mailbox to the specific breeds of dogs that were allowed in the community. I had mostly stayed under her radar by keeping my property immaculate and avoiding HOA meetings whenever possible. But 3 months ago, Patricia had decided that the boats in the community marina were an eyesore. Never mind that the marina had existed long before she became HOA president, or that the right to keep a boat there was explicitly written into every lakefront property deed. She had declared at a mandatory HOA meeting that all boats needed to be covered with regulation, HOA-approved navy blue covers whenever they were docked, and that any boat that did not meet her aesthetic standards could be subject to removal. I had ignored this rule completely. My boat was beautiful, well-maintained, and I was not going to hide it under some ugly tarp just because Patricia Cunningham had decided boats were suddenly offensive to look at. Several other boat owners had felt the same way, and we had collectively ignored her increasingly aggressive emails about compliance. Standing on the dock that morning, I was admiring how the sunrise reflected off the Blue Haven's hull when I heard an engine roar to life nearby. I turned to see Patricia herself at the helm of what appeared to be a borrowed pontoon boat, her face set in that expression of righteous determination that I had seen her wear at HOA meetings when she was about to fine someone for having their garbage cans visible from the street. The pontoon boat lurched forward, and I realized with growing horror that she was heading straight for my boat. I started shouting and waving my arms, coffee sloshing out of my mug, but she either did not see me or chose to ignore me. The pontoon boat picked up speed, cutting through the calm morning water with surprising momentum for such a typically sluggish vessel. The collision happened in slow motion. The front of the pontoon boat slammed into the starboard side of the Blue Haven with a sickening crunch of fiberglass and metal. The impact was hard enough that I felt the dock shake beneath my feet. I watched in absolute disbelief as Patricia threw the pontoon into reverse, the propeller churning up water as she backed away from my boat. The damage was immediately visible. There was a massive gash in the Blue Haven's hull, and water was already beginning to pour in. "What the hell are you doing?" I screamed, dropping my coffee mug and running toward the edge of the dock. Patricia had already turned the pontoon boat around and was heading back toward the opposite side of the marina. She did not look back, did not acknowledge what she had just done, just piloted that borrowed boat back to its slip like she had been on a casual morning cruise. I did not have time to chase after her. The Blue Haven was taking on water fast, listing to one side as the lake poured through the hole in her hull. I jumped onto the boat, nearly slipping on the wet deck, and tried desperately to assess the damage. The gash was at least 3 feet long and below the waterline. There was no way I could bail water fast enough to keep her afloat. I grabbed my phone and called 911, explaining that I had a boat sinking at the Lakeshore Estates Marina, and that I had just witnessed another boat deliberately ram mine. The dispatcher sounded skeptical but said she would send someone out. Then I called the marina office, but it was only 6:15 in the morning and no one was there yet. I tried using the boat's bilge pump, but it was no match for the amount of water flooding in. Within 15 minutes, the Blue Haven had sunk low enough that water was washing over the deck. I had to abandon ship, jumping back onto the dock and watching helplessly as my beautiful boat slowly disappeared beneath the surface of Lake Geneva. By the time the local police and fire department arrived, only the top of the windshield and the tip of the bow were visible above the waterline. Officer Michael Chen was the first to take my statement. He was a young guy, probably in his late 20s, and he looked genuinely sympathetic as I explained what had happened. I pointed across the marina to where Patricia was now standing on the dock near the pontoon boat, talking on her cell phone like nothing had happened. "That woman deliberately crashed into my boat and then just left," I said, hearing my own voice shake with anger and disbelief. "I watched the whole thing happen. She destroyed my boat and did not even stop to check if anyone was hurt or to help." Officer Chen followed my gaze to Patricia, then looked back at the partially submerged Blue Haven. "And you are certain it was deliberate, not an accident?" I am standing right here on the dock, waving my arms and shouting. "She looked right at me before she hit the boat," I said. "This is the HOA president. She has been trying to get rid of the boats in this marina for months. She sent out emails about it, made announcements at meetings. This was not an accident." The officer took notes and then walked over to speak with Patricia. I followed at a distance, still dripping wet from my attempts to save the Blue Haven, my hands shaking from adrenaline. I could hear Patricia's voice rise as the officer approached her. "I have no idea what he is talking about," she said, her tone indignant. "I was simply taking an early morning boat ride. If his boat sank, it is probably because he has not been maintaining it properly. That is exactly why I have been trying to implement stricter marina regulations." "Madam, multiple witnesses saw you collide with Mr. Vance's boat," Officer Chen said calmly, gesturing to where 2 other early morning joggers had stopped to watch the commotion and were now speaking with another officer. Patricia's face flushed red. "That was an accident. The steering on this boat is terrible. I barely bumped him." "You barely bumped him," I exploded, unable to contain myself. "You put a 3-foot hole in my boat and sank it. That was not a bump." "Mr. Vance, please let me handle this," Officer Chen said, holding up a hand. He turned back to Patricia. "Madam, leaving the scene of a boating accident is a serious offense. I am going to need to see your boating license and insurance information." What followed was nearly an hour of chaos as more police officers arrived. The fire department tried to figure out how to keep my boat from sinking completely, and Patricia insisted that the whole thing was being blown out of proportion. She kept saying that she was the HOA president, and that she was simply enforcing community standards. She seemed genuinely convinced that her position gave her some kind of authority to destroy property that did not meet her approval. Eventually, they pulled the Blue Haven partially out of the water using the marina's boat lift, but the damage was catastrophic. The entire starboard side was crushed, the interior was flooded, and the engine was completely submerged in lake water. A marine surveyor who arrived later that morning estimated the damage at well over $40,000, which was more than the boat was worth. Patricia was cited for reckless operation of a watercraft, leaving the scene of a boating accident and criminal property damage. As the officers explained her charges to her, she became increasingly hysterical, insisting that she was being persecuted for trying to maintain property values in the community. She actually said that she should be thanked for trying to get rid of my unsightly vessel. That unsightly vessel was worth $35,000 and you just destroyed it, I said, my voice cold with fury. I hope you have good insurance because you are going to pay for this. Patricia's eyes narrowed. The HOA will not be paying for anything. This was an accident, and I have already reported it to my personal insurance. They will decide what, if anything, they want to cover. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing on the dock next to my ruined boat with a handful of police reports and no idea what to do next. The next few days were a bureaucratic nightmare. I filed a claim with my own boat insurance, but my policy had a $5,000 deductible and would only cover the actual cash value of the boat, not replacement cost. The insurance adjuster who came out agreed that the boat was a total loss and offered me $28,000 after the deductible. That was not nearly enough to replace the Blue Haven with a comparable boat. I hired a maritime lawyer named David Foster who specialized in boating accidents. He was a gruff man in his 60s with a weathered face that suggested he had spent plenty of time on the water himself. When I showed him the police reports, the witness statements, and the photos of the damage, he actually laughed. "I have been doing this for 30 years, and I have never seen anything quite this stupid," he said, shaking his head. "She admitted to multiple police officers that she hit your boat, and she left the scene. This is going to be an easy case, but it is going to take time. These things always do." He filed a lawsuit against Patricia Cunningham personally, seeking damages for the full replacement cost of my boat plus my deductible, legal fees, and loss of use. He also sent a demand letter to Patricia's insurance company, a company called Premier Home and Auto, laying out the facts of the case and demanding immediate payment. Meanwhile, the HOA situation escalated dramatically. Patricia called an emergency HOA meeting for the following week, and I made sure to attend. The community center was packed with residents, many of whom had heard about the boat incident and were curious to see what would happen. Patricia stood at the front of the room with her usual entourage of HOA board members, including a thin woman named Margaret who served as treasurer, and a balding man named Robert who was the secretary. Patricia waited for everyone to settle down before speaking. "I have called this meeting to address some recent unfortunate events," she began, her voice tight. "As many of you know, there was an incident at the marina last week. I want to make it clear that this was an accident, despite what some people are claiming. However, this incident has highlighted the ongoing safety issues with the marina, which is why the board and I have decided to implement new emergency regulations." I felt my stomach drop. "What kind of regulations?" Patricia turned to look at me with an expression of barely concealed satisfaction. "Effective immediately, all boats in the marina must be removed within 30 days for a comprehensive safety inspection and dock repairs. Any boat that is not removed within that time frame will be towed at the owner's expense. The room erupted in protests. There were at least 15 boat owners in the community, and most of them started shouting questions and objections at once. Patricia banged her gavel on the podium, calling for order. "This is a safety issue," she said firmly. "The docks are clearly not structurally sound, as evidenced by the recent accident. We cannot risk another incident." "The docks are fine," shouted Tom Reynolds, who kept a fishing boat 2 slips down from where mine had been. "The only safety issue here is you crashing into boats." "That is out of order," Patricia snapped. "The board has made its decision. All boats must be removed within 30 days. End of discussion." I stood up, shaking with anger. "You cannot do this. Boat slips are part of our property deeds. You do not have the authority to just kick us out of the marina." Patricia's smile was ice cold. "The HOA has the authority to close facilities for safety reasons. I suggest you read your CC and Articles more carefully, Mr. Vance. Now, if there is no other business, this meeting is adjourned." She banged the gavel again and walked out, leaving the room in chaos. I immediately called David Foster and explained what had happened. He listened quietly, then asked me to send him a copy of the community's CC and Articles, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that govern the HOA. I dug out my copy of the property documents and emailed them to him that night. The next morning, he called me back. "Good news and bad news," he said. "The good news is that Patricia is completely full of it. The HOA does not have the authority to close the marina permanently or even temporarily without a legitimate structural issue confirmed by an independent engineer and a vote by the full membership. She's just trying to use the accident as an excuse to get what she wants." "And the bad news?" I asked. "The bad news is that you are going to have to fight this, which means more legal fees on top of what you are already paying me for the boat case. I can file for an injunction to stop her from closing the marina, but it is going to cost you." I closed my eyes and rubbed my temples. Between the boat loss and now legal fees, this was turning into a financial disaster. But I was not about to let Patricia Cunningham bully me or the other boat owners out of our legal rights. "Do it," I said. "File the injunction." David filed the paperwork that week, and 2 days before the HOA's 30-day deadline, a judge granted a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA from closing the marina or removing any boats until a full hearing could be held. When Patricia received the notice, she was reportedly furious, calling an emergency board meeting and sending out an email to all residents claiming that I was preventing necessary safety repairs and putting the entire community at risk. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out, which gave me time to focus on the insurance claim. Premier Home and Auto, Patricia's insurance company, had been dragging their feet on responding to David's demand letter. After multiple calls and emails, we finally got a response from their claims adjuster, a woman named Sandra who sounded exhausted. "Look, we have reviewed the police reports and the evidence," Sandra said on our conference call. "Our insured has admitted fault, and we are prepared to settle this claim. However, we are not going to pay for a brand new boat. We will pay for the fair market value of the boat you lost, which according to our research is about $28,000. "That is not enough to replace it," I said. "Have you looked at boat prices lately? A comparable Sea Ray Sundancer is going to cost me at least $40,000. "That is not my problem," Sandra said bluntly. "We insure for actual cash value, not replacement cost. $28,000 is our final offer." David jumped in. "Your insured destroyed my client's property through reckless and deliberate action. She did not just cause an accident. She intentionally rammed his boat and then fled the scene. If you do not make my client whole, We are going to file a bad faith claim against your company and pursue punitive damages." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Sandra sighed. "Let me talk to my supervisor. I will call you back." She did not call back for another week. During that time, the Lakeshore Estates HOA situation continued to deteriorate. Patricia was now sending out almost daily emails about various alleged code violations she claimed to have found on my property. One day it was that my grass was a quarter-inch too long. The next day it was that my mailbox was the wrong shade of white. Then she claimed my fence was 6 inches over the property line, which was completely false. I documented everything and forwarded it all to David, who added it to the growing file of evidence of harassment. Other boat owners were also starting to report similar harassment from Patricia, and a group of us decided to band together and split the cost of fighting the marina closure. Finally, Sandra from Premier Home and Auto called back. "My supervisor has authorized me to offer you $35,000 to settle this claim," she said. "That is as high as we can go." David looked at me, and I shook my head. "A comparable replacement boat costs $40,000 minimum," I said. "Plus I am out my $5,000 deductible from my own insurance, because I had to make a claim to even get my boat removed from the water. And I have lost 3 months of use during prime boating season." "$35,000 and we will pay your $5,000 deductible," Sandra countered. "That is $40,000 total. That should be enough to replace your boat." I thought about it. $40,000 was right at the low end of what I would need to buy a comparable boat. I had been searching online and found a few options in the $40,000 to $45,000 range. It was not ideal, but I was tired of fighting. Add in the cost of a boat cover and any registration and documentation fees for the new boat, and you have a deal, I said. Sandra agreed, and we had the settlement in writing within a week. $40,000 plus another $1,500 for covers, registration, and transfer fees. It was not enough to make up for all the stress and hassle, but at least I would be able to replace the Blue Haven. I started shopping for a new boat immediately. The problem was that there were not many good options in my price range, especially not in the middle of summer when boat prices were at their peak. I found a few older Sea Ray models, but they all had high hours on the engine or other issues that concerned me. Then I got a call from a boat dealer in Milwaukee named Shoreline Marine Sales. The salesman, a friendly guy named Eric, said he had heard about my situation from David Foster, who apparently knew the dealer's owner. They had a boat they thought I might be interested in, a demo model that had been used for shows and test drives but never actually sold. I drove up to Milwaukee the next Saturday to take a look. The boat was a 26-foot Sea Ray Sundancer, 2 feet longer than the Blue Haven and a year newer. She had the upgraded engine package, a better sound system, GPS navigation, and a premium interior with leather seating. The exterior was white with deep burgundy accents, and she was absolutely beautiful. "Here is the situation," Eric explained as we walked around the boat. "This was our demo boat last season. We have been using her for test drives and boat shows. She has about 50 hours on her, which is basically nothing. The only reason we are selling her is because we need the space for this year's models. Normal retail on this boat is $55,000, but I can let her go for $41,000 since she is technically a demo." I did the math in my head. With the $40,000 from Patricia's insurance plus the $1,500 for fees, I was just barely short. But this boat was significantly nicer than the Blue Haven had been. It was an upgrade in every way. "Can you do $40,000 even?" I asked. Eric grimaced. "I really cannot go that low. The owner would kill me. but I can do 40,000 and throw in a premium boat cover, full tank of gas, and free winterization service this fall. That is the best I can do." I looked at the boat again, imagining myself at the helm cruising across Lake Geneva. After everything Patricia Cunningham had put me through, the idea of ending up with a better boat than I had started with felt like a victory. "Deal," I said, shaking Eric's hand. The paperwork took about a week to process, and then I had to arrange to have the boat transported to Lake Geneva. When she arrived at the Lakeshore Estates Marina, I was there to meet her. Several of my neighbors came down to watch as the transport trailer backed down the ramp, and the crane carefully lifted my new boat into the water. Tom Reynolds whistled appreciatively. "Now that is a boat," he said. "Patricia is going to lose her mind when she sees this." I grinned. "That is what I am counting on." I named the new boat the Blue Haven II, and I made sure she was prominently displayed in my slip, gleaming white and burgundy in the summer sun. I did not bother with a cover. If Patricia had a problem with it, she could take it up with the judge at our upcoming hearing. The hearing on the marina closure was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late August. David had prepared an extensive brief arguing that the HOA had no authority to close the marina, that there was no legitimate safety issue, and that Patricia's actions were retaliatory and discriminatory. We had declarations from multiple boat owners, testimony from a marine engineer who had inspected the docks and found them perfectly sound, and copies of all of Patricia's harassing emails. Patricia showed up to the hearing with an HOA lawyer, a nervous-looking young man named Tim who looked like he had just graduated from law school. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Judge Martha Rixai, and she did not look amused as she reviewed the case file. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Judge Rixai said, looking over her reading glasses at Patricia. "Miss Cunningham, you crashed into Mr. Vance's boat, causing it to sink. Then, while facing charges for that incident, you attempted to close the marina where the boat was docked, claiming it was a safety issue. Your Honor, the accident simply highlighted existing safety concerns," Tim began, but the judge held up her hand. "I am asking Miss Cunningham," she said firmly. Patricia stood up, smoothing down her jacket. "Your Honor, as HOA president, I have a responsibility to protect property values and ensure the safety of all residents. The marina has become an eyesore, and the docks are old and potentially dangerous. The incident with Mr. Vance's boat was simply the catalyst for addressing a problem that should have been dealt with years ago. And the fact that you are the one who caused the incident does not strike you as a conflict of interest?" Judge Rixai asked. "It was an accident," Patricia said stiffly. "And regardless of how it happened, it revealed safety issues that need to be addressed." Judge Rixai turned to the marine engineer's report. "According to this independent inspection, the docks are in excellent condition and meet all current safety standards. In fact, the engineer notes that they were renovated just 4 years ago and should be good for at least another decade. So where exactly is this safety issue you are talking about?" Tim fumbled with his papers. "Your Honor, the HOA has the authority under the CC and Articas to close facilities for maintenance and repairs." "Temporary closures for legitimate repairs, yes," Judge Rixai said, "but this is clearly not that. This is retaliation, pure and simple. Miss Cunningham has been trying to get rid of the boats in this marina for months, according to these emails she sent. She destroyed Mr. Vance's boat, and when that did not work, she tried to close the marina entirely." She set down her papers and looked at Patricia with clear disapproval. "I am making the temporary restraining order permanent. The HOA is enjoined from closing the marina or interfering with residents' use of their boat slips. Furthermore, I am ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Vance's legal fees in the amount of $4,500 for having to bring this action. Do you understand? Patricia's face had gone red. This is outrageous. I am trying to protect the community. No, Miss Cunningham, you are abusing your position to harass a resident who did not comply with your unreasonable demands, Judge Rixey said sharply. If I see another case like this come through my courtroom, I will hold you personally liable. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Your Honor, Patricia said through gritted teeth. The gavel came down and the hearing was over. David and I walked out of the courtroom in triumph, while Patricia stormed out with Tim hurrying after her, trying to explain something about appeals. That went well, David said with satisfaction. You should get a check for those legal fees within 30 days. And Patricia is not going to bother you about the marina anymore, not with a permanent injunction in place. I thanked him and drove back to Lakeshore Estates feeling lighter than I had in months. But the saga was not quite over yet. The criminal charges against Patricia for the boating accident were scheduled for arraignment in September. I did not have to be there, but I wanted to see what would happen. The courtroom was smaller this time, just a routine criminal session with a dozen other cases on the docket. Patricia showed up with a criminal defense attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, who immediately tried to negotiate a plea deal with the prosecutor. I could not hear what they were saying, but I could see Patricia shaking her head adamantly, clearly refusing whatever was being offered. When her case was called, the prosecutor laid out the charges: reckless operation of a watercraft, leaving the scene of a boating accident, and criminal property damage. The total potential penalties included up to 2 years in jail and fines up to $10,000. Patricia's lawyer argued for dismissal, claiming that it was a simple accident and that Patricia had remained at the scene until police arrived, which was an outright lie. The prosecutor presented the police reports and witness statements that contradicted this, and the judge set a trial date for November. Your Honor, my client is a respected member of the community with no prior criminal record, Patricia's lawyer said. We would like to request that she be released on her own recognizance. Granted, the judge said, sounding bored. Next case. I left the courthouse feeling slightly disappointed that there had not been more drama, but David assured me that the trial would be a different story. She is going to lose, he said confidently. The evidence is overwhelming. At best, she will be offered another plea deal that includes restitution, probation, and a suspended sentence. At worst, she will go to trial and be convicted. While all this legal drama was unfolding, life in Lakeshore Estates had become increasingly uncomfortable. Patricia was still sending out harassing emails, but now she was being more careful about what she said, clearly aware that anything she put in writing could be used against her. She had also started showing up at the marina more often, walking past my slip with her arms crossed and a sour expression on her face every time she saw the Blue Haven II. The other boat owners and I had formed an informal alliance, meeting once a month at a local restaurant to discuss HOA issues and strategy. It turned out that Patricia had been bullying people for years, but most residents had just quietly put up with it rather than fight back. Seeing me successfully challenge her had emboldened others to start pushing back as well. In October, a group of residents organized a recall petition to remove Patricia from the HOA board. It required signatures from 30% of the homeowners, and within 2 weeks, they had collected nearly 40%. The petition was submitted to the HOA, and a special election was scheduled for early December. Patricia fought the recall viciously, sending out emails claiming that the petition was invalid, that the residents behind it were troublemakers trying to destroy property values, and that removing her would lead to chaos and disorder in the community. But her increasingly unhinged messages only seemed to turn more people against her. Meanwhile, her criminal trial date was approaching. In late October, Patricia's lawyer reached out to the prosecutor with a new plea offer. Patricia would plead no contest to reckless operation, and leaving the scene in exchange for the property damage charge being dropped. She would pay a fine, complete a boating safety course, and be on probation for 1 year. The prosecutor called me to ask if I had any objection to the plea deal. Honestly, Mr. Vance, I think we can get a conviction at trial, but trials are expensive and time-consuming. If she takes this deal, she will have a criminal record and she will be on probation. That is not nothing. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to see Patricia face a jury and be forced to explain her actions in open court. But another part of me was just tired of dealing with her and wanted to move on with my life. I do not object, I said finally, as long as she admits what she did and faces real consequences. The plea hearing was scheduled for the first week of November. I made sure to attend, sitting in the back of the courtroom as Patricia stood before the judge and acknowledged that she had recklessly operated a watercraft and left the scene of an accident. Her voice was barely audible, and she looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of everything that had happened. The judge sentenced her to 1 year of probation, 200 hours of community service, a $3,000 fine, and mandatory completion of a boating safety course. He also ordered her to have no contact with me for the duration of her probation. Miss Cunningham, you held a position of trust in your community, and you abused that position, the judge said sternly. You deliberately destroyed another person's property, and then tried to use your authority to retaliate against him. That is completely unacceptable. If you violate the terms of your probation in any way, you will serve the maximum jail time. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Patricia whispered. As I left the courthouse that day, I felt a sense of closure that I had not expected. Patricia had finally faced consequences for her actions. She had a criminal record now, and everyone in Lakeshore Estates knew what she had done. The HOA recall election was held on the first Saturday of December. The turnout was remarkable, with nearly 80% of homeowners casting ballots. When the results were announced, Patricia had been removed from the board by a vote of 72% in favor of recall. A new board was elected, including Tom Reynolds as president and 2 other reasonable people who had been part of the boat owners group. Their first act was to rescind all of Patricia's ridiculous marina rules and issue a formal apology to everyone who had been harassed by her during her tenure. That Christmas, the new HOA board organized a holiday party at the community center. It was the first HOA event I had actually wanted to attend in years. The atmosphere was completely different from the tense, hostile meetings Patricia had presided over. People were laughing and actually enjoying themselves. Tom raised a glass for a toast. "Here is to new beginnings and to everyone who stood up for what was right," he said. "And here is to Gregory and his beautiful new boat. May she sail for many years to come." Everyone cheered, and I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the wine I was drinking. For the first time since that horrible Tuesday morning in June when Patricia had crashed into the Blue Haven, I felt like things were actually going to be okay. Winter settled over Lake Geneva, and I had the Blue Haven too winterized and covered for the season. But I spent those cold months planning for spring, researching new fishing spots and plotting routes for summer cruises. I also started attending HOA meetings regularly, wanting to make sure the new board stayed on track, and that no one like Patricia ever took control again. Patricia herself seemed to vanish from community life. I saw her occasionally, usually getting into her car in the early morning or late evening, clearly trying to avoid running into neighbors. She had put her house on the market in January, and by March, it had sold. The moving truck came on a rainy Thursday, and I watched from my window as she supervised the loading of her furniture and boxes. I did not feel triumphant watching her leave. Mostly, I just felt relief. She had made so many people miserable for so long, and now she was someone else's problem. When spring arrived and the ice melted from the lake, I had the Blue Haven 2 unwinterized and launched for the season. The first time I took her out, the engine purring smoothly as I navigated out of the marina and into the open water, I felt a sense of peace that I had not experienced in a long time. Tom joined me that day, bringing his fishing gear and a cooler full of beer. We spent the afternoon on the water, not saying much, just enjoying the sunshine and the gentle rock of the waves. As we headed back to the marina at sunset, Tom turned to me with a grin. "You know, that woman did you a favor," he said. "Your new boat is way nicer than your old one." I laughed. "Yeah, I guess Patricia's insurance company did buy me a better boat. Still would not recommend her method of boat shopping, though." "Hell no," Tom agreed. "But you have to admit, there is something poetic about it. She tried to destroy your boat to get rid of you, and instead you ended up with an upgrade, and she ended up with a criminal record and had to leave the community." He was right. There was a certain poetic justice to the whole thing. Patricia Cunningham had crashed into my boat, sunk it, and fled the scene. She had tried to use her position as HOA president to bully me and retaliate against me for not following her absurd rules. But in the end, her insurance had paid for a better boat than the one I had lost. She had been convicted of criminal charges, removed from the HOA board, and basically run out of the community. As I tied up the Blue Haven 2 in her slip that evening, I looked around the marina at all the other boats, uncovered and gleaming in the fading light. The new HOA board had even approved funds to build 2 additional slips, and there was a waiting list of residents who wanted to keep boats there. Life in Lakeshore Estates had become what it should have always been, a pleasant community where people could enjoy their homes and their hobbies without being harassed by petty tyrants obsessed with control. The marina was thriving, property values were stable, and people were actually happy. I thought back to that Tuesday morning in June, standing on the dock with coffee in my hand, watching in disbelief as Patricia deliberately rammed the Blue Haven. At the time, it had felt like a disaster. I had been so angry and devastated, watching my dream boat sink beneath the surface of Lake Geneva. But now, almost a year later, I could see that it had been a turning point. Patricia's actions had been so outrageous, so obviously wrong, that it had finally galvanized the community to stand up to her. If she had just kept sending annoying emails and passing ridiculous rules, people probably would have continued to put up with her indefinitely. But by destroying my boat and then trying to close the marina, she had crossed a line that even the most conflict-averse residents could not ignore. And personally, I had learned something important about standing up for myself. I could have just taken the insurance payout and moved on, accepted the marina closure, let Patricia continue her reign of terror. But I had chosen to fight back, to hire a lawyer to document everything, to organize with other residents. It had been stressful and expensive, but it had been worth it. The Blue Haven 2 became something of a symbol in Lakeshore Estates. People would walk by the marina and point her out, telling the story of how HOA Karen crashed my boat and her insurance ended up buying me a better one. New residents would hear the tale as a cautionary story about why the community took HOA accountability so seriously now. I kept every piece of documentation from the whole ordeal in a binder in my home office. The police reports, the lawsuit papers, the settlement agreement, the court orders. Sometimes I would flip through it, marveling at how much had happened in such a short time. The paper trail told a story of one person's attempt to abuse their power and how that abuse had ultimately backfired spectacularly. Tom and I made the Blue Haven II's maiden voyage story part of our regular repertoire at community events. We would tell it over beers at the annual summer barbecue or at the marina's opening day celebrations, always getting laughs at the part where Patricia tried to claim the docks were structurally unsound, even though she was the one who had crashed into my boat. Years later, long after Patricia Cunningham had become just an unpleasant memory, I would still be grateful for the lessons that whole experience taught me. I learned that homeowners associations only have the power that residents allow them to have. I learned that bullies like Patricia rely on people being too tired or too scared to fight back. I learned that documentation and persistence can overcome even the most determined opponent. But most importantly, I learned that sometimes the worst things that happen to us can lead to unexpectedly good outcomes. Yes, Patricia crashed my boat and left it sinking. Yes, she put me through months of stress and legal battles, but her insurance did buy me a better boat. The community did come together to remove her from power, and life in Lakeshore Estates did improve dramatically. Every time I took the Blue Haven II out on Lake Geneva, cutting through the blue water with the sun on my face and the wind in my hair, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not just because I loved being on the water, but because the boat itself represented a victory. It was proof that doing the right thing, standing up to abuse, and refusing to be bullied could actually work out in the end. The marina continued to thrive under the new HOA board's management. They implemented sensible rules about safety and maintenance, without the arbitrary aesthetic demands that Patricia had been obsessed with. Boat owners were required to keep their vessels in good repair and to follow basic courtesy guidelines, but no one tried to force us to hide our boats under ugly tarps or threaten to shut down the marina. Tom served 2 terms as HOA president before passing the torch to another resident, a retired teacher named Susan Garrett, who brought a calm, collaborative approach to community management. Under her leadership, Lakeshore Estates implemented new programs like community movie nights, a neighborhood watch, and a shared tool library. The HOA became something that actually added value to people's lives rather than just being a source of fines and frustration. I eventually joined the HOA board myself, serving as the marina liaison. My job was to coordinate between boat owners and the board, help maintain the docks and facilities, and make sure that any new marina rules were reasonable and actually necessary. It was satisfying work, and it helped ensure that no one would ever again be able to abuse their HOA position the way Patricia had. The criminal conviction stayed on Patricia's record, a permanent reminder of what she had done. I heard through the community grapevine that she had moved to a condo in Milwaukee and was no longer involved in any homeowners association activities. Apparently, her new building was professionally managed, which was probably better for everyone involved. As for the Blue Haven II, she served me well for many years. I took her out almost every weekend during boating season, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends or family. I fished from her, water skied behind her, and took her on overnight trips to other towns along Lake Geneva. She never gave me a moment of trouble, her engines reliable and her systems well designed. Eventually, I sold the Blue Haven II when I upgraded to an even larger boat. but I always remembered her fondly as the boat that came out of chaos and conflict, the unexpected silver lining to one of the most stressful periods of my life. The new owner, a young couple who had just bought a house in Lakeshore Estates, listened with wide eyes as I told them the story of how I came to own her. "So your HOA president crashed into your boat, sank it, and then her insurance had to buy you this one?" the husband asked, shaking his head in disbelief. "That is exactly what happened," I confirmed. "And then we removed her from the board and she ended up moving away." "That is insane," the wife said, "but also kind of amazing that it worked out." "It was insane," I agreed. "But yeah, it worked out better than I could have imagined." As I watched them motor away in the Blue Haven 2 for the first time, I felt a sense of completion. That boat had been more than just a vessel for getting around the lake. She had been a symbol of resilience, of refusing to be a victim, of fighting for what was right even when it was difficult and expensive and stressful. The whole experience with Patricia Cunningham and the boat crash had taught me that sometimes the worst moments in our lives can become the best stories. At the time, standing on that dock watching the original Blue Haven sink, I had felt like my world was ending. But looking back, I could see that it had actually been the beginning of something better. A better boat, a better community, and a better understanding of my own ability to stand up for myself. Lake Geneva continued to sparkle in the summer sun. Boats continued to come and go from the Lakeshore Estates marina, and life continued in its complicated, messy, sometimes frustrating but ultimately beautiful way. And whenever I told the story of HOA Karen who crashed my boat and whose insurance bought me a better one, people laughed and shook their heads and said they could not believe something like that actually happened. But it did happen. Every word of it was true. And in the end, justice was served, the bad guy lost, and I got a better boat out of the deal. Sometimes, real life really does work out like a story with a satisfying ending. You just have to be willing to fight for that ending instead of accepting defeat. Standing on my dock years later, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of orange and pink, I raised a silent toast to the Blue Haven 2, wherever she was now. She had been more than just a boat. She had been proof that doing the right thing matters, that standing up to bullies works, and that sometimes, just sometimes, karma really does come through in the most unexpected ways. Patricia Cunningham had tried to destroy my boat and drive me out of the marina. Instead, she had destroyed her own reputation, lost her position of power, gained a criminal record, and had to leave the community. Meanwhile, I got a better boat, helped reform the HOA, and lived happily in Lakeshore Estates for many years to come. If that is not poetic justice, I do not know what is.